morning, church. Happy New Year. This is the new year for me. Last week I was sick, and so I wasn't able to be here with you. And I'll say I typically enjoy getting a week off preaching, but not last week. I did not enjoy that. The Lord allowed me to get what the doctors think was a neurovirus, and I will tell you that you don't want that, and I can testify that if you get it, God will be with you. And today we open up a new book for us, a new book to study, the book of Ecclesiastes. I will start out by saying what I said in an email maybe 2 or 3 Wednesdays ago, that Ecclesiastes is an interesting book. And when I say it's interesting, it's a book that has challenged preachers for generations. Some preachers, some very well-known, respected, famous preachers have given up on trying to preach it. And I feel that. 2 weeks ago, I sent you an email saying we were going to look at it New Year's Day. I sent you an email saying we were going to look at Ecclesiastes 1 last Sunday. Obviously, I was sick, but that email was a scheduled email. So I wrote that email on Monday and scheduled it to be sent on Wednesday. Well, Wednesday I spent the day studying, and by Wednesday afternoon I concluded that there is no chance I will be ready to preach Ecclesiastes 1 by that Sunday. And so I had already come up with something else I was going to preach last Sunday. And so just want you to know, Ecclesiastes this was going to be the first day of Ecclesiastes, whether it happened or whether I was here last week or not. But I thank God that He has given me understanding of the message of the book, and that I'm excited to share that with you. I certainly wouldn't consider myself an expert on the book, but rather a humble student of this book that we find in God's Word. One of the reasons that I wanted to look at Ecclesiastes before even understanding the message of it as a whole was the concluding statement we saw at the end of the video, and I'll read it for you. Ecclesiastes 12:13 says this: "The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man." If you remember, I did maybe a unconventional thing and talked about the fear of God on Christmas Eve when we looked at Mary's song. And I want you to know that I am convinced that to live in the fear of God is the best way to live life in this world. And I believe the whole point of Ecclesiastes, all 12 chapters, is to help you get to the place where you're convinced of this as well. And so we've set aside 10 of the next 12 Sundays to explore this book, and I will tell you, there will be times in these 10 weeks when I ask you to read ahead that you will get confused. But if you can remember one thing, you'll be all right. If something doesn't make sense, always fall back on Ecclesiastes 12, verse 13. Everything that we find in Ecclesiastes is meant to convince you of that, and so if it hasn't convinced you of that, then just go to that. I'll take the time to try and figure out how it fits. And I will say it maybe in a stronger way. If you conclude that something in Ecclesiastes does not lead to that, you have misunderstood that part of the book. And we're going to begin with the opening verse, Ecclesiastes 1, verse 1. It says this: "The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem." Some translations say teacher. The Hebrew word there is koheleth with a Q. It can be translated convener or collector, no matter which word you want to put there. We know something. He says he's the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Historically, it's been understood that this is Solomon. It's hard to think of somebody that will fit the description of the preacher better than Solomon. However, some think that it's not Solomon, but they don't know who it is, so I don't know what the point of that is. But either way, I found this, that one ancient tradition says that Solomon wrote the Song of Songs as a young man, or Song of Solomon, Proverbs as a middle-aged man, and then Ecclesiastes in his old age. I think the author is Solomon. But if you think it is someone else, I don't think it matters. And I will tell you why in a second. I do think it matters that the person meets the description, because the description is in God's inspired word. And so the person that you conclude that it is needs to meet the description. And if you can find someone better than Solomon to meet the description, go for it. It's left open. We're not told it's Solomon. We're just told all these things that make us think it's Solomon. But let me tell you why the human author doesn't make a difference. Look at Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verses 9 to 11. Had I not studied these verses, I don't think I would have been able to understand the message of Ecclesiastes. So let me start really with this. Besides being wise, the preacher or teacher or convener or collector, Koheleth, also taught the people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs with great care. The preacher also sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. They are given by one shepherd. Now, we don't have time to dive into all of those verses. We'll come back to them during the series, but I want to point out the ends of verse 10 and the end of 11. The end of verse 10 says that our author wrote words of truth. Everything we read in Ecclesiastes is true. This is not like the wisdom of Job's friends, which Job is meant to disregard as foolishness. That is not what we have in Ecclesiastes. Some do, however, read the book this way. I think they're mistaken. The end of verse 11 then says that the words of this book are given by one shepherd. The ESV, I'm not sure about other translations, capitalizes the S in shepherd, implying that this is not just a shepherd, but the shepherd. Think of Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. The words of this book come through the mouth or hand of a man, could be Solomon, but they are given by God. And that leads me to the main point for today, and really it's a main point for the book. You need to know this. A study of Ecclesiastes is a study of God-inspired wisdom. It is not the study of some man expressing things that we're supposed to say, well, that's not true. Because at the very end, we're told that it's true. This is how I will teach the book, as I believe it's the best way to understand it. I will also not teach the book the way that many have, and that saying that chapters 1 to 11 are talking about life without God, and it's only chapter 12 that talks about life with God. I actually find that approach to the book extremely discouraging, and I just don't think that's the way God intended for us to read the book. I have spent enough time reading people who hold that view, and I respect that view. I know why they hold that view, but I believe that all 12 chapters of Ecclesiastes teach us what life is like on earth for all humans, not just those who know God, or who don't know God, I should say. I'll explain. After our introductory verse, the book of Ecclesiastes has a poem. It'll take us all the way to verse 11, but it's the first line of the poem that we find a sentence that the rest of our study of Ecclesiastes is going to hinge on our interpretation of the sentence. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 2 says this: "Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities. All is vanity." Now, vanity is not a word that we use today. It's still in the dictionary. You can use it. But our author says all is vanity. And he doesn't just say it here, he says it later in this chapter, and he says it again. And chapter 12 just told us that everything in this book is true. So therefore, whatever vanity means must be able to be applied to all things. What I typically recommend when you come across a word that you don't understand is to open another translation of the Bible. We have all these translations into English. They're a blessing to us at times, and we look at these other translations to see how a different translator might interpret a word, a Hebrew word in this case. In this case, though, doing that only makes it worse. If you open the NIV or the New Living Translation, it says, meaningless, meaningless, all is meaningless. Here's the problem with that. It's not true. Chapter 12 tells us the words are true. And not only is it not true, if you study all the uses of this Hebrew word translated meaningless, the word is hebel, you find that the preacher doesn't even believe that all is meaningless. He teaches us the exact opposite of that in this book. And if you think that is what he meant, if you think that meaningless is the correct interpretation of the Hebrew word hebel, you have to conclude one of two things. One is that the preacher has not been given godly wisdom. That's one of your options. Your other option is that chapters 1 to 11 describe life for people who try to do it without God, and then chapter 12 describes once you finally give up and try to do life with God, which is an approach to the book. There are people I respect that take that approach. However, it's very hard for me to accept that approach given what the rest of Ecclesiastes says. I actually find that when you hear a pastor preach a message from Ecclesiastes, they don't hold consistently with that view, even if they say that's their view of the whole book, then they preach the book as they go through it in a different way. And so I'm going to teach Ecclesiastes consistently, and I hope that it will be a blessing to you. One important thing to note is that he ends the book, not the last verse, but there's a bookends that says all is hebel. He says it again at the end. So it's not like he gets smarter during the book and at the end he gets to the right conclusion. No, he begins and ends with this phrase, and so we have to ask, what does this word hebel mean? The good news when we come to a situation like this in our Bible is that our translations of the Bible are not inerrant. That may sound like a scary thing to hear a pastor say, but when scholars, when Orthodox believers teach that the Bible is inspired and inerrant, what they mean is that the Bible is inerrant in its original manuscripts. What we have are English translations of the original manuscripts, and translators are humans, and translators can make mistakes. That is what I believe has happened in the translation of the word hebel, specifically in the NIV and the NLT. And I would even say that the ESV's translation of hebel isn't the best one either. The Hebrew word hebel is used 73 times in the Bible. It is not an obscure word. There's another word we'll see in this text. I won't even point it out to you when you get it. It's only used once. That's a lot harder to try to figure out. It's used 73 times, and 38 of them are in this book. It's a key word. But one of the reasons for the struggle to translate hebel, I want to acknowledge this, is that there is no English equivalent for the word that captures its meaning. A literal translation of hebel would be breath or vapor. And so what I would have preferred when there's this much confusion about how to translate a word is for them to just translate it that way. For them to just say, breath is breath, all is breath. Just say that, and we're like, I don't know what that means. That's fine. At least it doesn't change our whole translation of the book, which is what has happened with the way they translate it meaningless. It changes your whole translation of the book, your whole understanding, I should say, of the book. The word hebel is not impossible to interpret. It can mean meaningless or worthless. That's how it's used at times in the Psalms to describe worthless idols, hebel idols. Same word. But it can mean other things as well. It can mean absurd. It can mean transient. And it can also mean enigmatic or mysterious. And because our author says all is Hebel, I believe that that last meaning is the best meaning for us to put in this context. One Old Testament scholar translates Hebel frustratingly enigmatic. All is frustratingly enigmatic. And I know the word enigmatic is not a word you hear every day, but it is still used. Our friend Google knows the definition. Let's put that up there. Google says enigmatic means a difficult to interpret or understand. Mysterious. Aaron Rodgers just came out with a documentary on Netflix called Enigma. I wonder if he chose the name under the premise that he is hard to understand, or at least that he is misunderstood. I watched it. I'm not so sure that he's hard to understand. However, I think that's what he wants us to think about him. But if we adopt the translation of Hebel as enigmatic or mysterious or frustratingly enigmatic, I believe it will allow us to read the book without being defensive. Because I believe when you read the book and it says all is meaningless, you should be defensive because it's not true. And the Bible, in chapter 12, tells us that the words in this book are true. This leads me to our first point. It'll be true of this book study. It'll be true of your study of the entire Bible. If something doesn't seem true, keep studying. Keep studying. It might not be fun to do that, but if you do, God might grant you understanding. It is not true that all is meaningless. It is not true that life is meaningless. The reason I had such a hard time with this is to get to the place where I can declare before people that I believe the NIV and the NLT translators missed it at this point. That's a hard thing to say. But I'm thankful that through study, that through finding other scholars who have been able to say this and who have given all the arguments for it, that today I can with confidence stand before you and say, I do believe they made a mistake. And if I would have given up when I was studying, I believe we would miss the message that God has for us in this book. And I recognize that you may have a full-time job or kids and activities, and you might not have time to keep studying something. Good news. You guys give, and that allows me to dedicate my entire work week to the work of the Lord, which includes studying His Word. So my commitment to you as a teacher is to wrestle with texts. If something doesn't seem true, to keep wrestling. Sometimes it's exhausting, but on the other side of it is understanding. An understanding that I can share it with you. And I'm thankful to not be the first one to wrestle with the book of Ecclesiastes. Like I said, many people, not many, but some people that I very much respect have given up on wrestling with the book, and I thank the Lord to give me strength to not do that so that we can study it together. If you are someone who has the time, maybe you're retired or something like that, and you're like, well, I want to study too. I have some resources. I have two in particular that I could send you. They are not little brief devotionals. They are pretty. One of them is 20 pages, and half of them are footnotes. But it will help you get to the place where I am if you want to do that studying your own. I can email them to you. They're free resources. But we're 2 verses in, and half our time is gone. But that's okay. I planned for that. We needed to establish these things in order to move quickly through the rest of this chapter. So look at verse 3. We get an important question. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? This question that the preacher asks isn't going to be answered at this point, at least not directly. But I want you to notice the word he uses, or the words he uses to describe where we live. He calls it under the sun. It's an interesting way of viewing the earth and life where we live. But it's a key phrase in Ecclesiastes. It's used over and over again. And what it means simply is life on earth. And based on what we read in the book, we know that this preacher understands the reality that we're told about in Genesis 3. That the whole earth has been subjected to the effects of the fall. This is not just something you find in Genesis 3. You find it even when you open the New Testament. It teaches the same thing. Work was meant to be something you woke up in the morning. You say, this is the day that the Lord has made. I'm so excited to go to work. And yet, that is not your experience, at least not every day. No matter how much you hear people talk about, well, if you find a job you love, you never work a day in your life. Nonsense. It's not true. It'll be better, sure, but that's not true. Work is toil, and that's because of the fall. There is nothing you can do to fix that. You can not work. You can be homeless or be rich, right? You can not work. However, if you work, you're going to have days where you're like, I don't feel like going to work. Humanity was never meant to experience that. But work, because of the fall, has become toil. I like to think about the fall in simple terms. Pick up a rose. Maybe you buy one rose for your wife or something, and you hand it to her, and if you go to a nice florist, they cut the thorns off. Do you know that is the way roses were created? There were no thorns before man sinned. All of creation has been subjected to the fall. We just take it as normal, and that's the way this author is going to teach us about the world because of the world we live in, but recognize that God did not design us to wake up in the morning and be like, I really don't feel like going to work. I hate my job. We weren't supposed to ever have to experience that, and yet that is what we find. Work is toil. So he asks, what does man gain by all this toil? And then in verses 4 to 7, we get all these different observations about how God has created the world. They're all pointing to one thing, the cyclical nature of the way God created things. See if you can pick up on it as I read through them. A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north, and around goes the wind. And on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. These are things the preacher has come to understand. He's come to understand that God has created nature in such a way that things go around and nothing seems to change. Even if man puts their greatest efforts to make it not so, to change these things, we fail. He then says this in verse 8, all things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. And this is one of those, the beginning of that verse is a verse where the idea I gave you earlier about reading another translation makes it a little bit easier. That word weariness is a word when we read it in English, we think like about the feeling state, but that word actually is describing something that causes weariness, not the actual effect, not the weariness that results. And so a better translation is probably, all things are hard at work, followed by, man cannot describe it. But the end of verse 8, he says, no matter how much we see or how much we hear, we always want to see or hear more. But could you imagine if this wasn't true? Like if we could get to the place where we could honestly say, I've seen enough. I've heard enough. And I don't mean like a judge, right? A judge hears all this testimony, has to make a ruling, and they're like, I've heard enough, I can make a ruling. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about saying, I've heard enough, now I understand everything. That would be weird. And the preacher goes on to give us a verse that ends with a well-known expression that we've pulled from this book. We've left the beginning of the verse behind, by the way, but let's read it. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. The first thing I'll say is this. This is not a verse denying the reality that there's been new inventions. I'm not sure what inventions were specifically invented in 2024, but I'm sure you could find an article that says, here's the things that got invented in 2024. I don't believe that the author would be denying that there are new inventions. But notice that phrase that people say all the time, there's nothing new under the sun, begins with and. It's linked to what comes before it. We just say the end of it because it sounds good, but we think, well, I can certainly think of new things. But I actually think the beginning of verse 9 is the more impactful part of the verse. The way I read it is as a statement embracing the fact that this world is fallen. We aren't going to fix the effects of the fall by knowing more, by inventing technologies. People have tried. But what has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. This will be the case until we experience what we talked about a lot in December, the new heavens and the new earth. At that point, the effects of the fall will be eradicated. But that will not be our human effort doing that. That will be God doing that. He goes on to say this in verse 10 and 11. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. The word translated things in verse 11 that reads one way. There's no remembrance of former things, but that word can also be translated people. There's no remembrance of former people. Think about how there is entire civilizations that archaeologists discovered that existed. Forgotten people. They might have had vibrant lives, and they may have had all these things that were invented and then forgotten and then had to be reinvented. Think about on a smaller scale how if you walk on the beach on a Monday and then you go back to that same place on the beach on a Tuesday, it's as if the wind and the waves seem to have erased any evidence of your ever being there. One thing I think this verse can help us with is when we experience things like COVID. And I don't mean being sick with COVID, I mean the pandemic of COVID, where the world seems to be rocked. Times when we think that no one has ever dealt with something like this before. I think the news is responsible for some of that. The news tries to sensationalize things so that we watch it. However, I can remember even when COVID was first happening and people were saying, well, if this is that bad, well, look at these plagues that happened in the past, and look at how this, and it didn't wipe all of humanity out, and it helped bring some calm to the craziness that might go on if you actually believe that humanity is facing something they've never faced before. The author of Ecclesiastes would strongly, at least the weakest way I could say it, is he would strongly discourage you from believing that humanity is now facing something they've never faced before. But the two things I think we need to take away from our look at chapter 1 are about to be made clear. We'll find them in the last, in verses 12 to 18, but let's first look at verses 12 to 13. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. You read the end of verse 13 and you're like, well, that's certainly a dark way of looking at things. and I will acknowledge that it may be dark, but it is true. And so let me help see if I can bring it into focus. The NIV translates the words unhappy business as heavy burden. Either translation is fine as long as you understand it correctly. I find that heavy burden is easier for my brain to wrap around. The point is this: God has made humans and animals differently. My dog doesn't try and figure out the world. She doesn't. My dog just lives by her instincts. This is true of all animals. Humans can't do this. We can't just stop trying to figure things out. We have an innate desire to understand the world, to find out what God is doing. We might not ask the question, what's God doing? But we say, is there any meaning to all of this? And we spend our lives trying to figure that out. Our church's mission statement acknowledges this. It mentions that we help people find their purpose in Jesus. If there is no meaning, there can be no purpose. My dog does not care about her purpose. And what the preacher calls the difference between what God has created animals with and what he's created humans with is a heavy burden. And this is made clear in the next verse. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after wind. Remember how I said the word vanity, I believe, would be better translated frustratingly enigmatic? This is where we see how important that translation will be. He says, all is Hebel and a striving after wind. One of the interpretive clues interpreters look to when they interpret a word is, what do the words around it say? What words are used with it? And in Ecclesiastes, the word that you find that's used with Hebel, vanity, is a striving after wind. And the word striving can also be translated shepherding. Shepherding the wind. It's a fool's task. You can shepherd sheep, but you cannot shepherd the wind. He's saying that our quest to understand the world God has made is as frustrating as trying to shepherd the wind. It cannot be done. And yet, we have an innate desire to understand it. This leads me to our second point. There is a frustration we all experience living under the sun. There's that key phrase I want you to remember. This is true for believers and unbelievers. For what believer can honestly sit before me and say that they are satisfied with their understanding of the world? I have not met one. And because all humans are made in the image of God, something that we will talk about next week, we have this innate desire to figure the world out. What is God doing in the world? Maybe more basically, what is God doing in my life? And no matter how hard we try, we come up short of understanding, and that frustrates us. You know, in 2024, Katie and I got into doing puzzles together, and I thought that we were weird for doing that, but we started doing puzzles, and in Katie's at least talking to people, she's created some puzzle exchange with people, so we have like 3 puzzles waiting when we're done the one, anyways, it's kind of cool, but I was surprised how many people do puzzles. We're at the place where we like to do 1,000-piece puzzles. I think it's just challenging enough to not too challenging. It takes us about a month of just, maybe an hour at a time sitting there and doing it. And I like puzzles, at least I think I like puzzles because it provides me an opportunity to just sit and talk with my wife. The puzzle for me is unconscious. I kind of look at things and I can see shapes, and then I pick one up and I'm like, oh, maybe that goes there, and then it clicks in, and it's cool. You feel really good about yourself. But then on the other side, the conscious part of me is able to talk to my wife. I can do both at the same time, at least I think I can. But I have wondered why humans do puzzles. And I have wondered why there isn't a puzzle completion service out there. Because if we just want to see completed puzzles, why isn't there people who are hired just to, you hire them, they do the puzzle for you, and they deliver it ready. It's all done. And I mentioned this to my wife, and she looked at me like I was crazy, because it's like, what's the point of that? And I'm like, but if the point is to solve the puzzle, what if you don't have time to do puzzles, but you just want to have solved puzzles? You could pay people to do that. It's like, well, that's not the point. I wonder if we like puzzles because deep down it helps us with this desire we have to figure things out. But I do have to tell you something. Life in a fallen world is not like a puzzle, at least not like any puzzle that I would ever attempt or any puzzle anyone I know would ever stick with. Life in a fallen world is like trying to complete a 1,000,000-piece puzzle and you're only given 300 of the pieces. I want you to think about that. I believe that the Bible would teach in that illustration that you've been given all the pieces you need to glorify God with your life. But you're missing a lot of pieces. You look at your 300 pieces that you might have, and you might have been able to place some of them, but you don't even know what the end is going to look like. You don't know what the picture is going to look like. Most people I know of one person that doesn't do this, but most people I know look at the picture when they do the puzzle. They even a strategy for puzzles is to do the frame first. I know people that don't do that either. But either way, it gives you some framework to work in. It makes the puzzle much easier to solve. But we don't have that. We find it frustrating. You look at an individual piece and you say, I think I know what this piece is. I can kind of see the edge of this and the edge of this, and maybe it connects to this. But you ever do a puzzle and you have a piece and you think you know where it goes and you set it in and it's close, but it's not the right place? Got to pick it back up. I've set pieces in and done puzzles and tried other pieces in the place that would fit, but because I put one piece in the wrong place, the piece I'm trying to figure out would have fit, but because I had the wrong piece there, now that piece doesn't fit. That's how we experience life. We try to figure it out, but we can't. And I will tell you that the quicker we make peace with this, the quicker we can enjoy life. The thing that was most encouraging to me as I took this deep dive into Ecclesiastes is the people that I know that have spent the most time with the book have concluded that the preacher in Ecclesiastes is a preacher of joy. The people that read Ecclesiastes and say, well, this guy is a pessimist and he's just a grumpy, cranky old man, right? I understand reading it that way when you only spend a little bit of time with it. But the people that spend a lot of time with it, I don't mean like they studied it and did a Bible study on it. I mean like they've spent their life trying to understand Ecclesiastes. They come to this conclusion that the preacher of Ecclesiastes and ultimately God, who is the shepherd who gives the words to the preacher, is trying to teach us how to enjoy the parts of life in a fallen world that are enjoyable. All parts of life in a fallen world are not enjoyable, but much of it is. But we need some help in order to figure out how to do that. But you might wonder, why would God allow life to be like this for us? You're like, the simple answer is, well, there's a fall. He didn't create it to be like this. But even then, we're given an answer in Ecclesiastes 3:14, why God would allow life in a fallen world to be like this. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it so that people fear before him. I told you guys at the beginning, Everything in Ecclesiastes is pointing to this need for us to live out Ecclesiastes 12:13, to live with the fear of the Lord, and chapter 1 is no exception. The preacher goes on to say this in verse 15, what is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. He'll come back to this in chapter 7, so I'm going to leave the deeper study for it until then. But the simple point is this: everything in this world is not fixable. And everything in this world is not, if I could make up a word, figure-outable. But if you guys can hang in with me for just a few more minutes, we're going to look at the last 3 verses. I'll cover them quickly, and I'll give you one point and some next steps. Verses 16 to 18 say this: I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me. And my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this is also but a striving after wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. I'll end with this point. Knowing more isn't the path to happiness. I'm so glad the preacher wrote this, because I am one who actually say, like, I love learning. I would even make a statement that, like, learning normally makes me happy. If I learn something in a day, it feels like a good day. But this preacher says he has more wisdom than all in Jerusalem before him. If you accept that Solomon is the preacher, he has supernatural, divine wisdom given to him as a gift from God, specifically for him, that nobody else ever got, and yet he concludes that knowing more isn't the path to happiness. In fact, it's quite the opposite. He says, as knowledge increases, so does sorrow. I'll conclude with a simple application that might help you during this cold and flu season. Last week when I was sick, I wanted answers. I wanted to know what was happening to me. I wanted to know what was causing my symptoms. At one point, from my understanding, I believed that my nerve endings were inflamed and my whole body was tingling. Unfortunately, something has been invented in my lifetime called Google. And you could spend as much time as you have, which when you're sick is a lot of time, searching your symptoms. And I can tell you that, at least in my case, that only increased sorrow. I read something at one point that was so troubling to me. I was looking at my symptoms, and I had symptoms that matched something that said, if you have this, it will likely last for months. And I said, months? Was literally terrified. So I went to urgent care, trying to trust doctors. I have a hard time doing that. And the doctor said, we think you have neurovirus. They tested me for COVID and flu A, flu B. They said, most people get over what you have in 1 to 7 days. But we're not going to test for neurovirus because there's nothing we can do. I don't like hearing that. But I will tell you that until I was better, every day I woke up afraid that I had something that was going to last for months. Because you didn't test for it. So there's a possibility. Google's knowledge only increased my sorrow. And I would say this: if I had this thing that would last for months, which is a real thing, I could have had that. I don't, but I could have. Would knowing that it's going to last for months really help me? Because last time I read my Bible, it talks about God's mercies being new every morning and him giving the strength for today. And so if I know that I need strength for a month, but God only is going to give me strength each morning as I wake up, is that really going to help me? All it's going to do is increase sorrow. And so you might ask me, next time when you get sick, will you stay off Google? Probably not. But I can testify that what this preacher says is true. Another way to understand his proverb is with a modern saying that I have found to be true in my life, that the more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know. You know, they say this about seminary. When you go to seminary, you think you know a lot about the Bible, and then you go to seminary and you realize, like in proportion, you leave seminary feeling like you know less about the Bible than you did when you went there, even though you know way more. It's an interesting thing. It's not a Bible verse, but I do believe that the chapter of the Bible we just looked at explains why this is so hard for us. We want to understand things. We want to understand what God is doing in the world. We can't. And that's frustrating. You say, why? We read that in Ecclesiastes 3:14, to help us learn to fear the Lord. That is the path to a happy life. I'm going to quickly share some next steps. If you want to scan the QR code, that should pop up. That's for you to fill out a digital Connect card. If you want to fill out a paper Connect card, you can do that on your way out. On there, if it's your first time with us and you let us know that it's your first time by checking that box and give us your mailing address, we'll mail you a free gift. There's also places on there for prayer requests. We would love to pray for you if you would share your burdens with us. Next step A is this. Answer this question. Can I accept that I can't understand all that God is doing in my life? Ecclesiastes actually says we can't understand all that God is doing in the world. It's a much starker statement than the idea that you can't understand what's happening in your life. But this question is more pointed. It's more personal. Can I accept that I can't understand all that God is doing in my life? I will acknowledge that we have something that this preacher didn't have. We have Romans 8:28, which says that in all things God works them together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. We have that as a framework for interpreting all of life, but even that requires faith. We can't often see how God is going to use this for good. We even ask questions like, God, how can this be good? How can you use this for good? I have no idea how you're going to do it. But the question is, can we sing the bridge of Waymaker? Even when I can't see it, you're working. Even when I can't feel it, you're working. Because although there's a frustration that all humans experience living under the sun, if we can't accept this simple question, this simple reality, this frustration will only increase. We don't have to understand everything to enjoy life. Next step B, begin memorizing Ecclesiastes 12:13. I know that memorizing scripture has kind of fallen out of practice in the church today, but I do think it's a good practice, and this is the most important verse in the book. And so it would be awesome for you to have it in your memory so that you can recall it as you come across things that are challenging to understand. Next step C, come back next week for Sanctity of Life Sunday. I'm not going to ask you to read chapter 2 because we're not looking at that next week. We'll look at it in 2 weeks. But instead, we're going to recognize something we've recognized since I became the pastor here, the fact that all humans are created in the image of God and thus have value. And the verse that I just asked you to memorize will actually, I believe, serve you greatly as we take up the topic of the sanctity of human life next week. And then finally, live this week in the fear of the Lord. I think this will be a next step for all of the sermons because that's the point. I don't know if you can remember the 3 statements I gave you on Christmas Eve from Pastor Kevin DeYoung that show a healthy fear of God, but I'll say them again and I'll also email them out in my weekly email this week. He says, God, you're really big and I'm not. God, you call the shots in my life. I don't. And God, you know what is better for me, than I do. I believe that if you will stick with us in this series, you will be able to make those statements by the time we get to the end of this series, if you can't already make them. But we're going to end our time together by singing a song that my mom sent me when I was in the throes of my illness. It's He Will Hold Me Fast. I find it incredibly encouraging. I want to share it with you. One of the days when I was sick, I watched myself preach a sermon. And I genuinely asked the question, am I ever going to be able to do that again? It was very hard for me to imagine being able to do what I just did in the throes of the sickness. And yet here I am. Christ held me fast. And so whether you need to hear this song today or whether you need to have this song in your repertoire to pull out when you go through an illness or when you go through something difficult in life, I want you to have it so that it can encourage you. I pray that it's a blessing to you. And so as team's already starting to play, would you stand? Will we sing? And then when we're done, Pastor Dennis is going to come and close us. And I would just encourage you, if you want to pray with me or with Kristen, our care coordinator, just hang around. We'll be at the stage. We'd love to pray with you. But let's sing this song, recognizing God's goodness in the midst of what can be troubling things in this life.